amazing and
Yeah, happy to
strong.
be here. And thank you for organizing this, and thank you everyone for joining. We know the budget can be hard to figure out, and there's a lot of things that feel very real this year about the budget in Philadelphia. So I'm sure people's interests have been piqued by the recent strike, and hopefully we can help demystify some of that today.
Yeah, so Andrew, would you mind if we give just like one more minute? We have maybe about like a third of the people on here. So we'll start at right at 5:33.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for your patience. I got to get my notes here because, is there a lot to go through and I don't want to miss a thing. All right.
Nice to see some familiar faces in the attendee list, including some board members. A former gym friend I see from years ago.
Very nice. Very nice. Yep. Got some of our advisory council members on. So that is lovely. All right. So it is 33. You ready for me to start? And then I'll just, for anyone who arrives late, we'll have this up on YouTube so they'll be able to see it then.
Fantastic.
I'm going to go ahead and start. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the final installment of our city budget webinar series. Over the last few months, we've broken down how the budget works, how decisions get made, and where residents have a say. Tonight, we're going to be taking a closer look at the budget that was just passed, $6.8 billion plan, with some big shifts and standout moments worth unpacking. So there's going to be four main areas that we're discussing. The first area is big budget decisions. So that's going to specifically address the home initiative and changes to the tax structure. The second big bucket is labor and contracts, including the DC 33 strike and how it shaped the conversation. Next, we're going to be talking about transparency and action. So that means more specifically issues around the sheriff's office, council, mayor relations, and then community input. And then finally, we'll talk about how outside forces, specifically the state and federal budget, how that will play a role this year. Overall, our goal tonight is to connect the dots between the numbers and what they mean for you, and to make this process hopefully feel a little more accessible, whether you're deeply involved in advocacy, curious about where your tax dollars go, or just trying to make sense of how Philly works. I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Andrew McGinley, who's been helping to lead this series, and he's going to walk us through what stood out. Andrew, would you like to say a few words before we jump in?
Just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us again for this wrap-up session. Clearly, people want this information. I'm glad we're able to provide it, and there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. I look forward to questions from the audience. I will note a lot of our information, we rely on really high quality reporting that we get here in the city of Philadelphia. The Inquirer is a great resource for figuring out how all these different pieces together. So I just wanted to flag that their information is really incredibly valuable to this work, the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Yeah, we will definitely be sharing a few additional places where you can learn more with some of our topics. And just a reminder, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any time. We've left 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A, and we would love to hear what's on your mind, and we'll make sure to follow up to everyone who's registered if we run out of time. So, no further ado, to begin tonight's conversation, because we have so much to tackle, we're going to break down the three major components of the budget. So, first, we'll do the home initiative, a landmark $800 million investment in housing. Then, a mix of tax changes, some that offer a modest relief and others that restructure how revenue is collected. And then, lastly, we'll do comparison year over year. both in terms of like content and process. All right, so home housing opportunities made easy. Love the name. So this is the centerpiece of the budget. It's a multi-year, $2 billion housing strategy anchored by those 800 million in bonds. The first 400 million is expected to be issued this fall, with programs rolling out over time. And the plan includes funding for affordable homeownership, basic home repairs, rental assistance, and it comes with new oversight provisions that require council to revisit the funding annually. So, of course, Andrew, anything that anywhere I'm a speaker, if I leave anything out, please correct me. But my first question to you, so this initiative represents one of the largest single purpose investments that we've seen in years, but the funding is spread out over time. I think Council President Kenyatta Johnson, in his questioning, had said, I have a 10-year-old son. By the time we're finished with this, he'll be 30. Like, what is going on? So we definitely long lifespan here. How should we be thinking about the benefits and the limits of tackling housing in this way, specifically through like bond financing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's important to start a little bit with like setting the context about what these programs are, because $800 million sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, of course. And maybe we'll start with that and then move into like the borrowing piece and how that all works. So, Mayor Parker has articulated a goal of building and preserving 30,000 units of housing in the city of Philadelphia. That's an ambitious goal. And I think it's an ambitious goal because it's a big problem, right? We know that housing stability and affordability is a challenge for Philadelphians. People need to be able to stay in their homes that they own, and we need more opportunities for new people to enter the market. So what she did is, what her plan has done and what council has ultimately bought into, they're investing in three key programs. The first, being basic systems repair. That is essentially exactly what it sounds like. This is a city-run program that provides grants to owner-occupied homes. So you have to be living in the home. But that's everything from getting plumbing and heating fixed, structural carpentry, and roofing. And if you think about that program, it's a really smart investment, right? Because if we can keep someone in their home by giving them $5,000 or creating a loan of $5,000, depending on the circumstances, that has huge dividends. One, a family is preserved. A home is how a lot of people build wealth over generations. And also, if they cannot maintain that home, it can become a blight on the community, right? So that those smaller investments in individual people have huge dividends for the entire community and the city as a whole. The next is the Turn the Key program, and that is a new housing development program. So we're building new housing on city-owned land. And that's a big investment in that program, working with private developers and nonprofit developers to build new housing, market rate housing based on the median income in that neighborhood. So I think it's like $83,000. So this is not low income housing. This isn't luxury housing. This is sort of workforce housing in some ways, might be a nice way to think about it. Like, this is something that a new family should be able to get in the city of Philadelphia, a new home that's safe, secure, has all new systems and is environmentally friendly. And then finally, Philly First Home, that is a program that helps new home buyers. So first time home buyers get an assistance grant of up to $10,000. Actually, this is a similar program. I'm not exactly sure if it's the exact same program, but back when I bought my house in Kensington in 2010, this was a program I was able to take advantage of as someone who was purchasing their first home. And it provides a lot of money that's really helpful for those like down payment costs if you're purchasing a home. So those are sort of the three key areas, really, where the investments to help secure housing for Philadelphians long term. There are obviously costs, right? This is a bond. We're borrowing money, and borrowing money costs money, right? The Inquirer did an estimate, and they're estimating that it'd be about $65 million a year of payments over 20 years in principal and interest, right? So that's a lot of money. And if we look at the city budget now, debt service is a large piece of our funding, right? We need to pay for money we've borrowed. Bond issues are a part of city government. And we are paying back loans. I think we're wrapping up paying back some loans that were all the way back in the Rendell administration, so in the 90s. there are long-term costs there, but it is a way to make these big investments at a time when the city really needs them.
Mhm.
So how do you measure that? How do you think about like what's effective? That's the big question. And there's some pretty clear ways, right? The mayor has articulated numbers. She's said 30,000 units of housing created or preserved, right? That's a big number. And the park administration's also set up, I think we've talked about in the past, the Philly Stat 360 website, where they're measuring their performance against important goals. So we can look at, how many grants were provided in each of these programs, basic systems repair, how many new properties were developed on those city-owned land, on the city-owned properties, particularly looking at turn the key properties that are being built on some of these like pre-cleared lots. So that as part of this initiative, council pre-cleared some lots for development through turn the key. Rather than having a two-step process where council has to move property into the land bank and then out of the land bank, we're removing one of those steps there. So we should be tracking, the city should be tracking, how many of those lots are developed, how many new houses are we building, and then how many people are able to get these grants. So there should be clear statistics. But investments in housing are investments in communities and investments in Philadelphians. So if you think about it long term, we should be able to see where this money is going and if it's meeting the goals pretty quickly. And I think one of the good changes that council came up with in coordination with Mayor Parker is that these programs need to be reauthorized annually. So there should be a good amount of evaluation that's happening. Council should be asking questions and really pushing for transparency in each of those programs as we go through the annual budget process.
That is so helpful in terms of the second question that I was going to ask, but you've already answered. Is just how should residents and advocates be watching and tracking this over the years, and definitely to learn even more about the three different programs that you spoke of already. We definitely recommend people to visit the city's data hub. Again, that's the Philly Stat 360. The home initiative is right on the homepage, just to make it even easier. And it'll continue to have information again about the basic systems repair program, Turn the Key, Philly First Home. There's over 30 different programs that are there, and so definitely can't list them all. But highly recommend people go there to continue to track. And I'm assuming, Andrew, that what we saw last year with kind of like a state of the city that happened in December, kind of like a wrap up that the mayor did, that we should look forward to more of those year over year, and maybe see some pieces of the home initiative addressed.
I would imagine. I mean, Mayor Parker has been pretty. That's not something that every mayor has done, but typically either in that address or in her next budget proposal, which will be in probably March of 2026. I would imagine she would. This is a marquee program for the Parker administration for sure. This is their big investment, so I would imagine we'll be getting a lot of data and a lot of information on how it's working. And then the other piece is, there's the second phase of borrowing that would happen in 2027. So
for the other 400.
For the other $400,000. So council authorized both. Only one will go to market in the fall, meaning like we'll get investments, proposals from banks. And the other thing I just want to note there, sorry if I'm talking too much, is that the fiscal health of the city allows us to borrow money at a lower interest rate. So the better the finances are for the city, the better our credit rating, the cheaper the money becomes when we have to borrow it. And so that's why it's been important to see investments long-term in Philadelphia to improve our fiscal health.
The natural counterpart to conversations about expenditures is obviously revenue. So if we pivot over to taxes, the other really big piece here. So this year's tax changes are more about long-term planning than immediate relief. Residents will see minor wage tax reductions and property taxes remain flat, but set as property owner. But the small businesses, small businesses are definitely the focal point this year. They were affected more immediately by the elimination of the $100,000 BERT exclusion. That change was prompted by legal concerns, and is expected to generate some revenue that the city's then going to redirect into grants and support services. So that is the kind of the context. question for you. So, in our second budget webinar, we were joined by our friend, former CFO to the council, Matt Sitt, who's also on the Tax Reform Commission. And so we talked a little bit about some of the recommendations for making sure that the tax system was fair and more growth friendly. So those don't always seem to go in tandem. Can you talk about how closely this year's like enacted changes across those three main revenue places, wage, business, real estate, how those align with the tax reform's recommendations and where they diverge?
Yeah. So the Tax Reform Commission made recommendations, and I think we talked about this even before we had Matt on, where these were recommendations. They sort of laid a proposal, and the theory behind it. And former Councilman Dom, also in the commission, who joined us for Ask the Experts webinar a couple of months ago, kind of laid out the theory behind their proposals, which was to um, increase growth, right? So increase the number of businesses in the city of Philadelphia, which then increases the number of employees in Philadelphia. So you grow the base and therefore can lower the rate. So you have more people paying taxes, and then the theory is they're paying less taxes. And the idea is that you're doing that by incentivizing businesses to build and invest in the city of Philadelphia, short term and long term. So they laid out their proposals, and the commission proposed eliminating the business income and receipts tax over 12 years, reducing the wage tax to below 3%, and increasing minimum wage, among other things. And so what ended up happening are a couple of things. One, the city has a roadmap now for these taxes, right? The business income and receipt tax is, the Parker plan that council approved includes a 13-year schedule for reductions within these taxes. So it doesn't do a huge change this year, but it does adopt a plan for the next 13 years of taxes. And we've seen mayor after mayor, year after year, chip away at things like our BERT tax and our wage tax. And so what the plan for the next 13 years is, that tax on net income will go from 5.8% to 5.7% next year, but over time will fall all the way to 2.8% by 2039. That is a ways away, but that's an important schedule that we have out. And then the tax
Quick question for that, or like clarification for people who are like, Bert, I kind of like Bert taxes, so this is the double tax that businesses have. Can you just give like a quick overview of that piece?
So business owners pay a tax on their net income, and then they also pay a tax on their net profits. So I believe it started in the 80s. I don't know the exact details, but my understanding was there was a proposal to create one tax, move away from the other, and the city never moved away from the other. So a lot of business owners say that they're taxed twice. And so the Tax Reform Commission believes that that's unfair and anti-growth for the city, and their plan was to get rid, to adjust these taxes to make things more fair. So we'll move to 2.8% from a 5.8% in the next 13 years on the net income tax, and then the tax on gross revenue will actually move all the way. Will be completely eliminated by 2039. So that is in line, largely in line, not exactly what they asked for, but largely in line with what the Tax Reform Commission proposed. Now, to be very clear, like this is law, but it can be adjusted in the future. So council can change that in the future if they need to, but it's a big change. And then they also proposed the wage tax moving all the way down to 3%. And by 2030, citizens will pay I'm getting into a lot of numbers here, I apologize. By 2030, city residents will pay 3.7% and non-residents will pay 3.39%. So it continued to decrease that wage tax for employees working in Philadelphia.
And that's important to know because we have like the largest source of tax revenue does come from wage tax, which is not the same for every city. And for cities comparable in size like Boston, theirs is real estate is their largest tax revenue. So yes, more money in my pocket, please.
Yeah, and the reality is, we bring in a lot of money through these taxes, but Philadelphia has fewer businesses per capita than peer cities. for a number of reasons, but this is largely, a big reason. Councilman Dom pointed to looking at City Line Avenue when we talk about this, and seeing the number of businesses that have just moved just across the city border, because the tax rate is better there for them than it would be being on the city side of the City Avenue.
Now, keeping with the business part, again, can you give us just a little bit of the background around the elimination of the small business
Oh yes,
exemption?
yeah. So this all goes back to Pennsylvania's Constitution. Great place to start with everything. The Constitution has a uniformity clause, and that essentially bans progressive taxation. So you cannot charge different tax rates in Pennsylvania based on the income of the person paying the taxes. We have essentially been doing that in some ways in Philadelphia by eliminating the taxes on the first $100,000 that a small business earns. So they're not paying that same tax rate. This was challenged, or is being challenged, I should say, in the courts right now. There's a company doing business in Philadelphia that I guess identified this as a legal issue, something that they were passionate about. I'm not exactly sure on those details, but there's a legal challenge. And when the law department looked at the case, they basically determined they're likely to lose the case
Mhm.
because of the constitutional language. In some ways, it's pretty clear. So they did away with that $100,000 exemption for small businesses. And what council did do is Mayor Parker proposed, like, I think a $30 million investment. Council upped that to $45 million. So those small businesses are projected to pay about $30 million in taxes through now that this exemption's been eliminated.
Mhm.
And what the city is doing is it's investing in those small businesses in other ways. They can't do away with that, but they can create grants and technical assistance available just to small businesses, so they're able to offset some of the impact, at least in the short term, for those businesses, while also moving towards a lower rate for everyone in the city over time. So they're investing in a lot of those different programs based on the budget this year, and then we'll see how those continue moving forward.
And I know from our conversations, not all of those grants and assistance programs are developed quite yet, so we can't really forecast how easy they will be for these businesses, especially if it is a very small business and they don't have a dedicated like admin person to work on these. So that's something that we can definitely circle back on in our next budget series, just to see once they have been developed, and then maybe also uh, the Philly Stat website will have those too.
Yeah, and I was when we were talking about this before, it popped into my head. The city had like a short-term grant program in the early days of the pandemic that they stood up,
Mhm.
and it was exactly targeted to small businesses across the city that all of a sudden had a huge loss in income. And
Mhm.
they were able to stand that up pretty quickly and get the word out. And it was a smaller program, not $45 million, but a lot of the business community was, we have a pretty good infrastructure between our district council people, the business community, like the chambers of commerce,